The day I realized my parents had already emptied Grandma's house, I stopped believing that family always tells the truth. My name is Claire Bennett, I'm 32 years old, and until last spring, I thought the biggest disagreement in our family was about whether Grandma Evelyn should move into assisted living. I had no idea that while everyone smiled through Sunday dinners and birthday calls, decisions were being made behind closed doors. Decisions that didn't belong to the people making them. The call came from my grandmother herself. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice unusually quiet. "Have you been to my house this week?" "No." "Why?" There was a long pause. "I drove by this morning." "You drove?" "I know I'm not supposed to," she replied with a little laugh. "But that's not the point." Another pause. "My porch swing is gone." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean it's gone. The flower pots too. Even the mailbox." Something tightened in my chest. "Stay there," I told her. "I'm coming." Grandma's little white farmhouse sat at the edge of Maple Ridge, surrounded by oak trees she'd planted with Grandpa more than 40 years earlier. Every birthday, every Thanksgiving, every scraped knee of my childhood seemed to belong to that place. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, my stomach dropped. The porch was empty. The rocking chairs Grandpa had built were gone. The wind chimes I'd given Grandma when I graduated college had disappeared. Inside was even worse. The living room looked like strangers had packed it. Picture frames were missing from the walls, leaving faded rectangles where they had hung for decades. Cabinets stood open. Drawers were half empty. It wasn't a burglary. It looked organized. Grandma slowly walked through each room with her hand resting against the wall. They even took Harold's toolbox. Harold. She still used Grandpa's first name whenever she spoke about him, even though he'd been gone for 9 years. "No one steals an old toolbox," she whispered. I didn't answer. Because I already knew who had a key. My parents. Dad had been helping Grandma manage the property for months. Mom kept saying they were preparing everything for the future. At the time, it sounded responsible. Now it sounded different. Much different. I pulled out my phone. Dad answered on the third ring. "Hey, kiddo. Why is Grandma's house half empty?" Silence. Then. "What are you talking about?" "I mean exactly what I said." Another pause. "We've been organizing some things." Without telling her? "We were trying to make things easier." "For who?" His voice grew careful. "This isn't a conversation to have over the phone." I looked across the room. Grandma was standing in front of the fireplace. Her fingers rested on the dusty outline where a family portrait had hung since before I was born. "They took our wedding picture," she said softly. Dad kept talking, but I barely heard him. "We'll explain everything this weekend." The line went dead. Grandma never cried loudly. She simply sat in Grandpa's old recliner, which, thankfully, was still there, and folded her hands together. I wasn't ready. For what? To say goodbye. I sat beside her. "Did you agree to sell the house?" She looked genuinely confused. "Sell it?" My heart skipped. "What?" She turned toward me. "Who said anything about selling?" For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, a truck rolled slowly past the house. The driver looked toward us, then kept going. Grandma sighed. The neighbors had been acting strange. "What do you mean?" They waved differently. I almost smiled. But then she added. "As if they know something." That evening, after making sure Grandma had dinner, I stayed behind while she went upstairs to rest. The house felt strangely hollow. Not because furniture was missing. Because something invisible had been removed. Trust. I wandered into Grandpa's workshop behind the kitchen. Most of his tools were gone, just like Grandma had said. Dust covered the workbench except for one clean rectangle where something heavy had recently sat. A metal filing cabinet remained tucked into the corner. Locked. I searched the drawers nearby until I found a tiny brass key taped underneath a shelf. Grandpa always hid spare keys in ridiculous places. The cabinet clicked open. Inside were neatly labeled folders. Insurance. Taxes. Property records. Garden plans. Nothing unusual. Until I noticed one folder that didn't match the others. No label. Inside was a single receipt. A certified copy request from the county recorder's office. Property deed. Requested 4 months earlier. The signature belonged to my father. I stared at the paper. Why would Dad request Grandma's property deed? Without telling her? Before I could think further, headlights swept across the workshop window. Someone had pulled into the driveway. I quickly slipped the receipt into my jacket pocket and closed the cabinet. Dad climbed out of his truck. Mom followed. Neither looked surprised to see my car. Dad opened the workshop door. There you are. His smile looked practiced. We figured you'd still be here. I folded my arms. You requested Grandma's property deed. His expression barely changed. You've been looking through files. You've been looking through her life. Mom stepped forward. Honey. No, I interrupted. Answer me. Dad rubbed the bridge of his nose. The house needs to be sold. Grandma doesn't even know it's for sale. We're protecting her. From what? He hesitated. From making impossible decisions. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you make them instead? Mom's eyes filled with tears. You don't understand how hard this has been. Then explain it. Neither of them did. Instead, Dad said something that made even less sense. The paperwork is already moving. What paperwork? He looked toward the house. Then back at me. It doesn't matter anymore. It matters to Grandma. He lowered his voice. Claire. There isn't much she can do now. Those words sat between us like a stone. Inside the house, a floorboard creaked upstairs. Grandma was awake. Had she heard any of this? Dad noticed the sound too. His face changed. We shouldn't discuss this in front of her. You mean the woman whose house you're selling? Mom whispered, please. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Dad turned toward his truck. We'll meet Sunday. I don't think waiting until Sunday is a good idea. It has to be. Why? He opened the driver's door but stopped before getting inside. Without looking at me, he said quietly. Because by then, the closing should already be finished. The truck disappeared into the darkness, leaving me standing alone in the driveway with the deed receipt crumpled in my hand. When I finally went back inside, I found Grandma sitting at the kitchen table instead of upstairs. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She was smiling. A small, knowing smile I'd never seen before. She opened an old recipe book and slid a yellow envelope across the table toward me. I wondered how long it would take them, she said. Inside the envelope was a document dated 6 months earlier, and the first sentence made my blood run cold. My hand shook before I even unfolded the document. Grandma didn't rush me. She simply sat across from me, stirring a cup of tea that had long since gone cold, as though she'd been expecting this exact moment. What is this? I whispered. She looked at me with tired eyes. Read the first page. The document wasn't a will. It wasn't a deed either. At the top, in bold letters, were the words. Revocation of power of attorney. The date was exactly 6 months earlier. Below it were signatures. Grandma's. A notary's. 2 witnesses. I read it twice before looking up. You canceled Dad's authority over your finances. I did. But, he still acts like he's in charge. Because I never told him. That answer hit me harder than I expected. You let him think he still had control? Grandma gave a slow nod. I needed to know what he would do if he believed no one was watching. Silence filled the kitchen. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the windows. I didn't want to believe my own suspicions, she said. A mother always hopes she's wrong. I swallowed. When did you first suspect something? She leaned back in her chair, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. It started after Harold passed. Grandpa had always handled the paperwork. The taxes. The insurance. The repairs. After his death, Dad stepped in. At first, he was exactly what everyone expected, a devoted son. He drove Grandma to appointments. Fixed the porch. Paid bills online. Organized her files. No one questioned it. Least of all Grandma. But little things changed, she said. What things? I stopped receiving bank statements. I frowned. He said everything was paperless now. Then came missing mail. Phone calls that Dad insisted on answering. Appointments that somehow got cancelled without Grandma knowing. Even birthday cards from distant relatives seemed to arrive weeks late. I kept thinking I was forgetting things, she admitted quietly. But I wasn't. A chill ran through me. Someone hadn't stolen her memories. They'd slowly been taking away her independence. Why didn't you tell me? She smiled sadly. Because you love your father. So do you. Yes. Her voice cracked just enough for me to hear it. And that made it even harder. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the revocation papers. If Dad no longer had legal authority, then what paperwork was he talking about? And what closing? After making breakfast for Grandma, I drove to the county records office. The woman behind the counter smiled politely. What can I help you with? I'm trying to verify ownership records for my grandmother's property. She asked for the address and began typing. After a few moments, her expression changed. What? There's a pending transfer. My stomach tightened. Pending? She nodded. It hasn't been recorded yet. Who filed it? I'm sorry, I can't discuss details without proper authorization. I thanked her anyway. As I walked toward the exit, someone called my name. Claire? I turned. Standing near the hallway was Mr. Leonard Brooks. He'd been Grandpa's attorney years ago before retiring. He looked older now, walking with a cane, but his sharp blue eyes hadn't changed. I thought that was you. We exchanged a quick hug. I heard Evelyn was doing well, he said. I hesitated. Actually, things are complicated. His smile faded. With the house? I froze. You know about that? I know your father contacted several attorneys. My pulse quickened. What for? He wanted someone willing to move things, quickly. What do you mean? Mr. Brooks looked around before lowering his voice. I declined. Why? Because something didn't feel right. He sighed. Claire. I've practiced law for 40 years. I've learned to recognize when someone is in too much of a hurry. That afternoon, I returned to Grandma's house with more questions than answers. She was in the garden, trimming roses as though nothing unusual was happening. I told her everything, including my conversation with Mr. Brooks. She wasn't surprised. He came to see me. When? Months ago. You never mentioned it. I couldn't. Why not? She looked toward the old maple tree where Grandpa had once built me a tire swing. Because I asked him not to. I stared. You planned all of this? No. She shook her head. I prepared for it. There was a difference. And suddenly I understood. Grandma hadn't been trying to trap anyone. She'd been protecting herself. That evening, while helping her put away gardening tools, I noticed something strange. The old shed door wasn't fully closed. Inside, behind stacks of flower pots, sat a large wooden trunk. I had never seen it before. "It's heavy," Grandma said. It belonged to Harold. She handed me a small iron key hanging from a piece of faded blue ribbon. "I think it's time." The lock clicked open. Inside were dozens of carefully organized folders. Family photographs. Letters. Tax returns. Insurance policies. Every major family document going back nearly 30 years. Grandpa had documented everything. Every receipt. Every signature. Every agreement. Then, at the very bottom, beneath a folded quilt, lay a sealed envelope. Across the front, in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 words. "Only open if Evelyn is betrayed." Neither of us spoke. Grandma slowly reached for the envelope. Then stopped. Her hand trembled. "I've never opened it." "You knew it was here?" She nodded. "He made me promise." "What kind of promise?" "That if our family stayed together." She couldn't finish. Tears filled her eyes. I'd never need to know what was inside. The room became impossibly quiet. Outside, thunder rolled across the evening sky. I carefully picked up the envelope. It felt heavier than paper should. Whatever Grandpa had left behind. He had expected betrayal long before any of us ever imagined it. And for the first time, I wondered if he had seen this entire family disaster coming years before it began. For nearly a full minute, neither Grandma nor I moved. The envelope rested between us on the old workbench, its edges yellowed with age. Grandpa's handwriting was as steady as I remembered, careful, deliberate, impossible to mistake. "Only open if Evelyn is betrayed." Grandma drew in a slow breath. I always hoped I'd die before needing to read those words. I looked at her. "You don't have to." She gave me a sad smile. "I think I do." She carefully broke the seal. Inside were 3 items. A handwritten letter. A small cassette tape. And a folded legal document. Grandma reached for the letter first. As she unfolded it, I noticed the date. It had been written just 6 weeks before Grandpa died. Her lips trembled as she began reading silently. Halfway through, she stopped. Her eyes closed. "What is it?" I asked. Instead of answering, she handed me the pages. At the top Grandpa had written, "My dearest Evelyn. If you're reading this, something happened that I prayed never would. This letter isn't about money. It's about trust." My heart pounded. I kept reading. Grandpa explained that during the last year of his life, while undergoing treatment, he'd quietly begun organizing every family record. Not because he expected conflict. Because he noticed behavior he couldn't ignore. He never accused anyone of stealing. He never claimed anyone had committed a crime. Instead, he described something much more subtle. Pressure. Conversations about simplifying things. Repeated suggestions that Grandma should sign documents she hadn't read. Offers to take care of everything. At first, he'd appreciated the help. Then he'd started asking questions. Some answers never made sense. One paragraph stopped me cold. "I don't know whether our son is acting out of fear, financial stress, or something else entirely. I only know that good people sometimes convince themselves they're doing the right thing while taking away someone else's choices." There was no anger in the words. Only heartbreak. Grandpa hadn't written about an enemy. He'd written about someone he loved. I looked up. Grandma was quietly crying. "He knew," she whispered. "He suspected." She nodded. "But he still hoped your father would choose differently." We unfolded the legal document next. It wasn't a will. It was a timeline. Every meeting. Every financial discussion. Every document Grandpa had signed during his illness. Each entry included dates, witnesses, and notes. One line was circled in red ink. If any future property transfer occurs without Evelyn's informed written consent, speak to Leonard Brooks immediately. The attorney, I said. Grandma nodded. So Grandpa trusted him. He trusted very few people. A question kept nagging at me. If Grandpa suspected this years ago, why didn't he confront Dad? Grandma looked toward the workshop window. Because confrontation isn't always protection. What do you mean? He believed giving someone the chance to do the right thing was better than accusing them too soon. She sighed. Maybe he was right. Maybe he wasn't. The cassette tape was the last item. Grandma laughed softly through her tears. We'll need an old tape player. I think I know where to find one. An hour later, I drove to my parents' basement storage room. Mom had given me the garage code years ago. I told myself I was only looking for an old cassette player. Nothing more. The basement smelled exactly as it had when I was 12. Cardboard boxes. Holiday decorations. Old bicycles. Near the back shelf, I found a dusty stereo system. As I unplugged it, something caught my eye. A stack of moving boxes. Each one had a white inventory label. My breath caught. Dining room. Living room. Master bedroom. They weren't random labels. They matched Grandma's house. I stepped closer. One box wasn't fully taped. Inside was Grandpa's handmade clock. The one that had hung in his living room for 25 years. He hadn't lost it. It had been packed. I opened another. Family photo albums. Another. Grandma's china. Another. The missing wedding portrait. Every item had been carefully wrapped. Not stolen. Prepared for moving. Footsteps echoed upstairs. I froze. Someone was home. The basement door opened. Mom stood on the stairs. She looked from me to the open boxes. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she quietly walked down. I was wondering when you'd find these. I expected excuses. Instead, she sat on one of the boxes. She suddenly looked years older than I remembered. You think your father forced this, she said. Didn't he? She stared at the concrete floor. No. My heartbeat quickened. Then who did? She covered her face with both hands. We're trying to save him. The words made no sense. Save Dad? She nodded slowly. He made a terrible mistake. What mistake? He believed he could fix it before anyone found out. What are you talking about? Tears rolled down her cheeks. It started with an investment. I frowned. What investment? He lost almost everything. The room seemed to tilt. How much? She whispered a number. I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't thousands. It wasn't even tens of thousands. It was enough to destroy a lifetime of savings. He never meant for any of this to happen, Mom said. He thought selling the house would solve everything. My voice barely worked. He was going to pay off his debt, with Grandma's home? Mom nodded once. He kept telling himself he'd buy it back. Neither of us spoke. Because we both knew people don't secretly sell someone else's home with plans to magically undo it later. I looked around the basement again. Every box suddenly meant something different. This wasn't greed. It was desperation. And desperation had driven my father somewhere I never believed he could go. Just as I picked up the cassette player to leave, something slid from behind one of the boxes. A thin envelope. Addressed to my father. Postmarked 3 months earlier. Across the front, stamped in bold red letters, were 4 words that turned my stomach. Final notice before litigation. Chapter 4. I picked up the envelope, but before I could open it, Mom gently took it from my hands. "Please," she whispered. "Not here." Her voice wasn't defensive anymore. It was exhausted. I looked at her. "How long have you known?" She stared at the envelope for several seconds before answering. "Long enough to know your father was drowning, and too ashamed to ask for help." "What kind of investment loses that much money?" She shook her head. "It wasn't one investment." I waited. "It started with a business partnership. Dad had invested part of his retirement savings into a friend's construction company. The company failed. Instead of accepting the loss, he borrowed money to recover it. Then borrowed more to cover the first loan. Each decision was supposed to fix the last one. None of them did. He kept saying, 'Just one more contract and everything will be back to normal,' Mom said quietly. But it never happened. So he decided to sell Grandma's house. He convinced himself it was temporary." I closed my eyes. "He actually believed that?" Mom nodded. "He thought he could repay everything before she ever found out. But she would have found out." I know. The silence that followed hurt more than the confession itself. Because I could finally see what Grandpa had written about. This wasn't a man who had stopped loving his mother. It was a man who had allowed fear to become stronger than honesty. I drove straight back to Grandma's house. She was sitting on the porch, watching the sun disappear behind the oak trees. One glance at my face told her everything. "You know now." I sat beside her. "Dad owes a lot of money." She nodded slowly. "I suspected." "You knew?" "I knew he was afraid." She looked toward Grandpa's old garden. "Fear changes people. It doesn't excuse them." "No." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "But understanding someone isn't the same as excusing them." I thought about those words for a long time. Then I told her everything Mom had confessed. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked only one question. "Did he ever ask me for help?" I looked down. No. A single tear rolled down her cheek. That's the part that breaks my heart. The next afternoon, my father called. "Can we meet?" "Where?" "The old diner on Route 16. I almost said no. Instead, I agreed. He was already sitting in a corner booth when I arrived. He looked different. His shoulders were slumped. His hair seemed grayer than it had just a week earlier. He didn't smile. "I suppose your mother told you." "She did." He nodded once. "I deserve whatever you think of me." I didn't answer. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "When your grandfather died." He looked out the window. "I promised him I'd take care of your grandmother." His voice cracked. "I really meant it." "So what happened?" "I got scared." He admitted losing the money. He admitted hiding the debt. He admitted asking attorneys to speed up the sale. Then he looked me straight in the eyes. "But there was one thing I never did." "What?" "I never forged your grandmother's signature." I frowned. "Then how was the sale moving forward?" His expression changed. I've been asking myself the same question. For a second, I thought I'd misunderstood. "What do you mean?" "I submitted paperwork. But the buyer's attorney suddenly said everything was already approved." I assumed. He stopped. "You assumed what?" "That your grandmother had signed something years ago." My heartbeat quickened. "You never saw the final documents?" "No." "Then who did?" Dad slowly shook his head. "I don't know." A cold feeling spread through me. If Dad hadn't forged anything, then someone else had been moving the sale forward. Someone who had access. Someone who knew exactly which documents to use. That evening I called Leonard Brooks. He answered on the second ring. Claire? I need to ask you something. Go ahead. If my father didn't have legal authority anymore, who could have filed paperwork on the property? There was a long pause. Then Mr. Brooks quietly said, there are only a handful of possibilities. I grabbed a notebook. Tell me. He hesitated. Before I do, I need you to answer one question. What? Has your grandmother mentioned a woman named Patricia Wells? The name meant nothing to me. No. It should. Who is she? Mr. Brooks exhaled slowly. She was your grandparents' real estate attorney. I've never heard of her. Most people haven't. Is she still practicing? No. What happened? She retired years ago. So why does she matter? His next sentence made my stomach tighten. Because Patricia Wells prepared a completely different set of property documents, and almost nobody in your family knew they existed. I stared at the phone. A different set? Yes. For a completely different plan. Before I could ask another question, Grandma called my name from the hallway. Claire. Her voice sounded unsteady. I rushed inside. She was standing in the living room, holding an old framed photograph that had somehow been overlooked when the house was packed. The backing had fallen off. Something was tucked inside the frame. Not a photograph. Not a letter. A folded legal envelope. Grandma slowly pulled it free. Across the front, in Patricia Wells' handwriting, were the words. To be opened only if anyone attempts to sell this house without Evelyn Bennett's full consent. I suddenly understood one thing with absolute certainty. Grandpa hadn't prepared just one backup plan. He and Grandma had been quietly preparing for this moment for years.